Alright, so this chapter we're actually going to look into the big cells that really make life happen. Alright, to give us an example and an introduction, think about this. Most of the world's population can't digest milk-based foods. This includes me. These people are lactose intolerant because they lack the enzyme lactase. So it illustrates the importance of the molecules such as lactase in our daily functions. So lactase is an enzyme, so this is going to be one of the proteins that we talk about in the next lecture. And lactose is an actual carbohydrate that we'll talk about in this section. So both of those are related to things we're going to talk about. Alright, we will look at an intro to organic compounds and see what those mean, because organic compounds in chemistry are very, very different than organic stuff in the store. It has a very, very different meaning. We'll look at carbohydrates and lipids. We'll save proteins and nucleic acids for the next lecture. So we need an essential question for this lecture. So our essential question, it's a weird looking cube for some reason, is what are macromolecules? And then what are their major components? So we'll attempt to answer this not just today, but also in the next lecture. So that kind of covers two. So an introduction to organic compounds. What that means. Most of the molecules a cell makes are composed of carbon, bonded to either other carbons or other elements. And really that's all an organic compound is. So a carbon-based molecule is an organic compound. If it's organic, it contains carbon. That's important. That's it. That's really all that's to it. Is an organic compound contains carbon. By sharing electrons, carbon can bond to up to 4 other atoms. That's because carbon has 4 in its valence shell, electron shell, so we know that. Methane is one of the simplest organic compounds. It's got 4 covalent bonds linked to 4 hydrogen atoms. About as easy as you can get here. There you go. That's methane. So each of the 4 lines in the formula for methane represent a pair of shared electrons. So carbon feels like it has 8 because it's sharing so much, and so it feels like it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's happy. Just to show you the nice 3D ball and stick model here that it works. This guy actually in 3D, by the way, kind of takes on what they call a tetrahedral shape, because in 3D, the hydrogens actually try to get as far away from each other as possible, and it just so happens that this is the furthest distance that it can possibly get from one another. You don't have to know that, but I think it's an interesting fact to point out. Alright, methane and other compounds composed of only carbon and hydrogen are what we call hydrocarbons. So they're called hydrocarbons because they contain hydrogen and carbons. I have a feeling my dog's going to be very whiny through this particular lecture. But hydrocarbons, it contains hydrogen and carbons. Okay? Carbon with attached hydrogens can form chains of various lengths. That's carbon attaches kind of like this, and then hydrogen fills in all the rest to complete all the sharing. Okay? So that's a chain. It can also form all kinds of other things too, but there you go. There's one butane for you. So a carbon skeleton is a chain of carbon that can differ in length, and they can be chained or branched or in rings. So just like the last one, that's a nice chain for you. A branch might be, remember you're still filling in hydrogens, I'm just being lazy, but a branched one might mean that we might have a carbon come this way and a carbon come off that way. So now we have branches. Okay. We can also have this cool thing with rings, and carbons usually form actually more in kind of a hexagon shape. And then the hydrogens fill in either place. But that's actually a structure that happens quite often. Okay? So that's a ring. A hexagon is essentially a ring. So here are some examples. We've got ethane, propane, butene. They can do double bonds, single bonds, branch. They can form rings. You don't have to know any of the necessary examples, but you see how all the connections for carbon can come together. Alright, compounds with the same formula but different structural arrangements are called isomers. And these are huge as far as the body's concerned. They're very, very important. Just one little difference can make just like being flipped, being a mirror image, can cause a difference between knowing something and not knowing. Let's see. No, you're not going to be able to play it today, and that's okay. But there are animations, so there are structural isomers, there are geometric isomers, and enantiomers. So structural isomers, they're just in different structures, but still contain the same number of carbon and hydrogen all the way around. Geometric ones, they have kind of just slightly off on one end. It's like almost like it's twisted. Okay, and enantiomers are mirror images, just to get you an idea. But seriously, enantiomers are just huge because you can have one thing one way and one another way, and if they're mirror images, your body will recognize one as really, really good, and the other one is like, what is that? And it's a toxin. So the structure is very, very important as far as a body is concerned. Alright, a unique property of organic compounds depends on their size and shape and their carbon skeleton. A group of atoms that are attached to that skeleton are a very special set of things that can kind of change and alter the way something works. So a good example of where we have those atoms attached, which kind of those little groups change everything, is in testosterone and estrogen, or estradiol. But you notice they have the same basic 4-ring structures, slight difference, but same basic structures, and we really just have a difference here, and we have a difference right here. And those make really all the difference in the world. Is just, I mean, these are differences between males and females just because of tiny chemical changes. That's how big a role they play. So I gave you the chart on this one. There are 5 groups. There's actually 6 total, and they're called functional groups. These guys are just kind of like little variables, but they can be attached and they'll affect a molecule's function. I didn't give you all the details on those. You don't really have to know these, just know what a basic functional group is, like that it can affect the properties if it's added. Like this one, this is a hydroxyl group, it makes an alcohol. We've got carbonyl groups with aldehydes. Carboxyl group, which will form part of a carboxylic acid, which is something we'll look at for proteins. So is the amine group, we'll look at some of those for proteins. Phosphates will be important for ATP when we talk about energy stuff in the future. And methyl groups are just like methane, just part of methane atom. Okay. There are 4 classes of molecules that are important to organisms that you should have seen in the beginning, and we're only going to talk about carbohydrates and lipids today. Next time we'll explore proteins and nucleic acids a bit further. Okay. The 4 classes of biological molecules contain very, very large molecules. You know, you don't necessarily see them with your naked eye, but they're huge as far as molecules are concerned. So we call them macromolecules because macro means big, okay? And molecules just molecules. So it's a big molecule because they have a large size. We also call them polymers because they're made up of identical or similar building blocks that are strung together. It's not quite the same as the polymers that are made for plastics and stuff, but polymers are just repeated units of these macromolecules for what we do. And we have building blocks of polymers that are called monomers. The way I remember these, so hopefully you remember that mono means one and poly means many. right? So I always say one MERS make up many MERS. That's how I do it. Shush. Oh, this dog. Since she's disrupting me anyway, this is probably a good time. We're at the 10-minute mark. Take a break. Pause the video. Go do some things. Chunk your notes. Look over them again, and then come right back. So monomers are linked together to form polymers through a reaction called a dehydration reaction. Think about when you're dehydrated, what does it mean? It means that you don't have enough water. So what happens with a dehydration is that we're going to lose a water. Okay? So we'll link together, but we're going to lose a water in the process. So we're going to dehydrate. Okay, lose water. Then polymers are broken apart by what we call hydrolysis. So hydro is referring to water. Lysis is a special term that means to split. So we lost a water, and now we're going to get that water back. So we add the water back in order to pull things apart, but then we have to break the water or split the water. So that process is called hydrolysis because we split the water. These reactions are mediated by enzymes. Enzymes are cool things that we'll talk about in the next section, and they basically just speed up the rate of reactions. So make sure you have that important definition. We'll get into those in more detail than we probably even want to get into detail about them in the long run. A cell makes up a large number of polymers made from a small group of monomers. This is the coolest part for me. It's just absolutely amazing. All the proteins in your body, and there are a lot of them. So many things that I don't know that we're even aware of. But there are so many proteins in the body, and they're made from just 20 different amino acids. It's the sequence that makes them different. It's the sequence that affects the whole thing. But we're just talking 20 different amino acids build every protein you can ever imagine. All of them. Same with DNA. Everything that has DNA, which is every living organism on this planet, and then we'll talk about it later, some like in-betweeners, have DNA, and it's all that kind of variety and variation from just 4 kinds of monomers. We get A's, T's, C's, and G's, and just those 4 things repeated in variations and lengths and sequences, and that's what gives us the diversity of life. Isn't that crazy? It's like we have in common with flies and plants and everything else the same kinds of A, T, C's, and G's and the same kind of amino acids for proteins. And I don't know, it's amazing to me. So those monomers are used to make polymers, and they're essentially universal, and that just means everybody uses them. Everybody. Big, small, I mean, the little bacteria on you now use the same thing. Alright, just to reiterate the point here, here is a dehydration reaction. We're going to lose that water. We take this unlinked one, we put it together. Notice the H, the 2 H's will come together with the O. We make a water, we lose it, they link together. Whenever we want to split this, in case we want to reuse it later, or whatever it is, we add the water back, and then we split the water into an OH and an H. So notice we're splitting the water. Okay? You break a bond, you split the water. Okay? There you go. Alright, so that's that first section. Now we'll move into carbohydrates, and we'll talk about these guys and their kind of basics. Carbohydrates are really, they're fairly diverse. Carbohydrates range from small sugar molecules, monomers, to large, what we call polysaccharides. By the way, if you looked on the sheet that I gave you, the saccharide part means sugar. Okay? And poly means many, so these are just many sugars. And what do they happen to be made of? Sugar monomers are mono, or one saccharide sugar. Okay, so one sugars. One sugars make up many sugars. If you learn the root words, they want to tell you what they mean. These guys, these monomers, are found in fructose, glucose, and honey. These are all made from single one sugars, if you will. And there's some delicious honey with some cute fuzzy bees. Bees do cool things, by the way. They even have a little, it's called the waggle dance, and that's how they communicate with each other. There's a little side note for you. Monosaccharides can be hooked together by, again, that dehydration reaction to form complex sugars, and then polysaccharides or many sugars. Okay, so again, it's the dehydration reaction. It's a losing of water. We make and lose the water that does that. The carbon skeleton of monosaccharides vary in length. Glucose and fructose kind of are what we're familiar with. There's 6 carbons, others have 3 to 7. You really don't have to worry about that so much. But basic kind of functions here, this is important, is that monosaccharides are really the main fuels for cellular work. And these guys are the raw materials to manufacture all kinds of other organic molecules. So they serve a really important purpose, even just being little 1 sugars. Okay? So this is what glucose and fructose look like, although they're often more found in rings. So what happens is those will come together, and glucose and fructose both are in that ring or hexagon structure. Okay. A hexagon. Okay, that helps you remember it. There you go. The ring diagram may be abbreviated to not show the carbons at the corners, can be drawn with different thicknesses. You really don't have to write this part either. It's just interesting to show you that there's different ways that in chemistry that these particular rings are represented. Alright, this is important because we can link 2 1 sugars together and form a disaccharide, a 2 sugar. Again, by a dehydration reaction. So forming is by dehydration. So the disaccharide sucrose, that's basically the table sugar that you have, the white kind of table sugar, is formed by combining glucose and fructose together. Okay, 1 of each. And the disaccharide maltose is formed by 2 glucose monomers. So that's an interesting thing. I forgot to mention this in my other video, but you guys can get this firsthand, is if you notice this, we've got sucrose, glucose, fructose, maltose. If it ends in OSE, it's pretty much, at least for what we're concerned with, it's going to be a sugar. And that's helpful to be able to identify different things. So if it ends in OSE, it is probably a sugar. Okay? Helpful hint there. Alright, so here we're making maltose. We take 2 glucose. Notice we've got kind of two H's and an O there, so we can add those together, make a water, lose the water, and they'll come together as a disaccharide or a 2 sugar. Just an interesting thing here, again, you don't necessarily have to write it down, but it's something to think about. A little connection here is that we've got sodas and fruit drinks with this high fructose corn syrup. Several years ago they even had commercials about high fructose corn syrup and how it was like completely healthy in moderation, which, I mean, is reasonable. Fructose generally is actually sweeter than glucose, but to make high fructose corn syrup, glucose atoms are rearranged to make glucose into fructose. So they use it, and then they take about a 55% fructose to 45% glucose mixture, and it kind of represents roughly about the same as sucrose, so they're trying to get sucrose. I remember one of those commercials, was like, your body can't tell the difference. I don't know, this is not science, technically, because it's more anecdote than anything, but we tried it because I've had, a Coca-Cola from, the U.S., and I've had a Coca-Cola from Mexico. The U.S. one has high fructose corn syrup, and the one from Mexico has pure cane sugar, which is mostly sucrose, and they taste different to me. And I think the one from Mexico tastes better, in my personal opinion. They're doing something right with the Coca-Cola. And the glass bottle is nice too. Just a side note, it's nice to be in a glass bottle. It's just, I don't know. I like glass things, like drinking cups or whatever, like glasses. All right. We'll get back to it so you don't waste more time on your videos. You're like, what is this lady talking about? So most scientific studies haven't really shown that there are any consequences associated with it, but we've noticed that some of the consumption has declined, and yet still obesity rates are on the rise. So just a little reminder, good health is important. It's good health is promoted by a diet with proteins, fats, vitamins, all the things that we're going to talk about, complex carbohydrates from fruits and vegetables, and I exercise and not peace, tea, and Cheetos. Alright, you could check the back of a Coke can, or really anyone. If you've got any kind of soda at home, you can check and see. One of the second things behind carbonated water is the second highest kind of... They do these in order and amounts, so the next highest amount of stuff is high fructose corn syrup. Just so you know. Alright, polysaccharides, your many sugars, are macromolecules. They're polymers composed of thousands of one sugars. Polysaccharides really form the function, and you should know the function of polysaccharides is for storage and structure. Okay, so that's their basic function, is to make sure that we have storage and good structure. So examples of those are starch. It's a polysaccharide. It's just solely glucose, and plants use it as an energy storage. So we think about this most associated with potatoes. And potatoes are very starchy, but it's just glucose repeated, so that way there's energy storage. Glycogen is actually glucose again, but this is what animals use for energy storage, in the form of glycogen. Then we have cellulose. Again, you can tell it's the ose part. But cellulose, that's another polymer of glucose, and that forms the cell walls of plants. And a little different, but we do have chitin, polysaccharide, insects and crustaceans, and actually cell walls of fungi are made up of this stuff. So insect and crustacean exoskeletons, their little like outsides are made of chitin, and some fungi are made of chitin. So in the future we'll get to talking about that kind of relationship between animals and fungi. Here's the basic examples. So starch is actually one nice long string of glucose, and that's that storage there. Glycogen in animals has lots more branching to it. And then the cellulose of cell walls is kind of a lot of glucose that's kind of, I don't know, it's like it forms a nice string or a yarn. It's kind of wrapped so much. It's kind of cool. Polysaccharides are usually hydrophilic, so they get along with water. And you can think of this with like bath towels, for example. If you're soaking up water, it works really well. Bath towels are mostly cellulose because they're parts of plants, the cottony part. So cotton is a plant, and so it's able to absorb that water. And so bath towels are absorbent because they contain that cellulose. So there's a good example. All right. That's a good, I went a little long, but I did it on purpose. So now's a good time. We're at a break and something different. So now's a good time to pause, go back, chunk your notes, review a little bit, and then come back and we'll finish off with lipids, which shouldn't take us too long. Alright, lipids are the different thing. They actually don't have monomers, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But these guys are different. These are water insoluble or hydrophobic, water-fearing. Okay. These guys are important for long-term energy storage. So that's why people have fat. This is we really do for that purpose. All kinds of animals have even blubber, which is still lipids, fat storage. It's for energy storage. Your body's holding on to things in case, worst happens and you're not able to eat for a little bit. Then it's got plenty of energy. So we contain twice, or actually lipids, fats, those kinds of things, contain twice as much energy as a polysaccharide. So a lot more energy efficient. And they consist mainly of carbon and hydrogen. That's about all that they're made of. And they're linked in those covalent bonds, those sharing is caring bonds. Oh, very nice. Lipids differ from carbohydrates, proteins, and nucleic acids because they're not really all that big, and they're really not built from monomers. They're kind of built from several other pieces, not necessarily repeating units. These guys can actually vary a great deal in structure and function. There's a lot going on with them. So the types we'll consider are fats, phospholipids, and steroids. Okay? Those are our three major types of lipids. A fat is a lipid made from two smaller molecules. One part is a glycerol, and the other one is a fatty acid. Okay? Okay, so fatty acids can link to glycerol, again, by dehydration reaction. So anytime there's a link we're building, we use dehydration. Okay. A fat contains one glycerol linked to 3 fatty acids, and fats are often called triglycerides because of that. Triglycerides. See how these words are not actually creative at all. Just have to know a little bit about them. Okay, so here's what happens. We've got a glycerol up top. We've got an H here, an H here, and an O. They'll come together to form water. We'll lose that water, and then they'll attach. So you'll get 3 different attachments. So that is a triglyceride. And you have good ones and you have bad ones. We have saturated and unsaturated fats. I'm sure you've heard of these things. So we'll talk about what did those mean in particular. Particularly with health, that's important. So some fatty acids contain 1 or more double bonds. Okay? Those are unsaturated fatty acids. Saturated means to have the maximum amount. Well, if it's unsaturated, it means it doesn't have the maximum amount. What does it not have the maximum amount of? It does not have the maximum amount of hydrogen atoms for each carbon. Okay, so there's a double bond. Okay. These double bonds actually cause kinks or bends in that carbon chain, preventing them from packing tightly together and being able to solidify at room temperature. Okay. So fats that have that maximum number of hydrogens are called saturated fatty acids, and they can solidify at room temperature. So we can, examples just up here, this would be unsaturated, and this would be saturated. Okay. You can see down there, but the whole idea is this one's a liquid at room temperature, and this one's a solid. So saturated fats are still delicious. Okay, so unsaturated fats are usually referred to as oils, so you could think olive oil, you can think vegetable oil, things like that. Most animal fats are saturated fats like lard or Paula Deen's favorite, butter, right? Love butter. You can actually hydrogenate vegetable oils that are unsaturated and convert them to saturated fats by adding hydrogen. It's not the healthiest thing in the world, and it happens all the time. It actually creates some things that are called trans fats, which I won't explain the chemistry behind that, but they are things that the body doesn't recognize well. It kind of recognizes them as a toxin because that's not really how they occur in nature. And so your body's like, what's up with that, dog? I apologize, she is noisy and whiny today. Alright, phospholipids are a major component of all cell membranes. And we'll talk about them a little bit in the next unit when we talk about cells. But phospholipids are structures that are similar to fats. Fats contain 3 fatty acids attached to a glycerol, but phospholipids have 2 fatty acids attached to a glycerol. It's got a phosphate on it too, just for fun. But there's a glycerol and a phosphate that's there, and then these two are our fatty acids. And they actually make up the membrane, our cellular membrane. Okay. There you go. So phospholipids cluster into a bilayer or a 2-layer. The hydrophilic heads, or the water-loving heads, will be in contact with the water that's on the outside of the cell and the water that's on the inside of the cell. And then the hydrophobic tails will be sort of antisocial and cluster together in the center of that bilayer. And they're like, oh, no water, gross. And they'll hang out together. All right. So you get here the hydrophilic heads that are closer to the water. And then inside you get the hydrophobic tails, the two layers that just want to hang out together and not be associated with any of the rest of the world. Right. A couple other things we are almost done is we have steroids. These are lipids that have carbon skeletons that form 4 fused rings. Cholesterol is actually an example of a steroid, and it's a common component of animal cell membranes, and it's the starting material for making like steroids or hormones and things like that that include sex hormones. So we have cholesterol. Right? Cholesterol looks like this, and you can see the 4 fused rings. And you can see if you went back several slides, if you looked at it, it actually looks like testosterone and estradiol. All right. One last little connection here, and then we will be done, as to think about anabolic steroids. These are synthetic variants. You don't have to write this, by the way. It's just interesting. But these are synthetic or kind of man-made variants of the male hormone testosterone. And they get abused by some athletes with some serious consequences, including mood swings, depression, liver damage, cancer, high cholesterol, blood pressure. When I was a college athlete, we had some of those athletes that we knew, and we found out later on that they were using steroids, or as we refer to them, the roids. They got using them, and then, it just, you lose a little respect among athletes when you do it. Kind of, you're cheating, basically. So, but there's all kinds of just terrible consequences just for using steroids, of the synthetic steroids. Just terrible stuff. Ugh. Bad, bad, bad. All right, and so that actually ends our section. All right, that's it. So be sure to look back over your notes, read through them again, make sure that if you have any questions at all, shoot me an email, and keep working your way through it. We'll have another lecture up soon that you guys can make sure that you come next week with. Okay?